Is Moff Gideon really dead? The season 3 finale ended in a massive bang, with Axe Woves crashing the falling light cruiser right into the heart of the Imperial base, seemingly wiping everything out, including Moff Gideon himself. And season 3 appears to be rather intent on closing the chapter on the Moff, with all of his plans revealed, especially when it comes to cloning. It seems as though there's really nothing more to be said, and in all honesty, it wouldn't be a terrible ending for one of the biggest villains in Star Wars. After all, our heroes have basically spent 3 seasons worrying about him and battling him in the last few episodes of each season. And given that Star Wars loves things in trilogies, a 3-season arc with Moff Gideon seems like a good way to close things out. But is he really dead? While on the surface it seems like the fire incinerated everything, there are a few details that when explored do seem to cast a little bit of doubt over his death. So in this video we're going to explore all the ways Gideon could have survived, and if he did survive, where does his character go from here? The first and most interesting clue by far is Moff Gideon's mustache, or rather the absence of one. Now in the last 2 seasons, every time we see Gideon, we see him sporting a mustache. However, most notably in the 3rd season, the mustache seems to disappear. Now this could either be a continuity issue, or perhaps the Moff simply shaved it off during his time in prison, but when we take a closer look at the cloning project, the detail seems a little too coincidental. You see, when Grogu takes a closer look at Moff Gideon's clones in the finale, we get a small jump scare moment when the clone opens its eyes. But don't let that distract you from the fact that the clone doesn't have a mustache as well. And if you draw the 2 dots together, the absence of a mustache on both the supposed original Gideon and the clone Gideon might suggest that the Gideon that Mando and Bo were facing off was a clone as well. That the Gideon that died in the fire wasn't the original Gideon at all. And if this is indeed true, it would be quite the insane twist. If at all, the possibility that the Gideon here might actually be a clone would call into question where the real Gideon is. I mean, taking into account that Gideon was trying to clone himself, it would also mean that we've never really actually seen the real Gideon, at least not in season 3. Given that the cloning project was very much still in progress as seen in season 2, it is possible that sometime between his escape from the New Republic and now, Moff Gideon made the switch, using his clones to run certain errands while he headed off doing something else. I mean, if Moff Gideon knew that the Mandalorians and the New Republic were after him, it would make sense for him to switch out with a clone for his own protection, allowing him to operate in secrecy while the clone took all the heat. And it's definitely a very fascinating theory to consider, one that would go very well in the many Legend storylines out there, most notably Palpatine, who cloned himself in Legends and such. Now this is a bit of a far-fetched theory in all honesty, and given how straightforward things seemed in the finale of season 3, I highly doubt that this is the case. However, even if Moff Gideon was his true original self and not his clone, I actually rate his chances of survival pretty well. Don't forget that the man was completely decked out in Beskar armor. The suit itself was an upgraded design from the older Dark Trooper armor, and so by virtue of it being Beskar, he already has a pretty high chance of survival. Also, not to mention, the Dark Trooper armor has already been proven to be fireproof. In fact, back in season 2, Mando tried to take down the Dark Trooper using his flamethrower, and besides burning off the non-Beskar skin-like material covering the joints of the Dark Trooper, it really didn't do much else. So it would stand to reason that the Moff with his newly upgraded armor would also be able to resist the heat, or at the very least still function after suffering some nasty burns. So I could totally see the possibility that Moff Gideon managed to survive, but due to the intensity of the heat, become permanently scarred. Also, not to mention, we know that his suit has thrusters on it, so he definitely could have easily escaped the situation if he wanted, suffering major burns but still able to at least get out of the situation. So if the show wanted to bring Moff Gideon back, they could easily do so. But I think part of asking whether Moff Gideon is really dead would also depend on whether the story needs him to still be alive. And judging by the way things ended, I don't really think that we need him to return. 3 seasons is plenty of time, and it does seem like the show is intent on moving towards a different direction. And I think bringing him back would make it a little bit of a tired storyline. I mean, Moff Gideon is a good villain and all, but I really thought that season 3's finale was really all the show could use him for. I'm just not sure how much more of a threat he can be to the main characters after being so soundly defeated. But that being said, while I think Moff Gideon's time as a primary antagonist is over, he can still make some sort of return. Specifically when it comes to moving the overall plot towards Thrawn. Recall that back in episode 7, Gideon puts forward the idea that the Shadow Council should look to new leadership, referring to himself as a potential candidate, and this political move came at the expense of Thrawn's position. And while Gideon's designs to further his political power may not come true, the show may use Gideon as a stepping stone to amplify Thrawn's threat. It could very well be the case that upon Thrawn's return and learning from Pelion that Gideon was initially intent to replace him, Thrawn may then decide to make an example out of Gideon. Given Gideon's failure to prevent the resurgence of Mandalore, the loss of a major Imperial base, and is now what I assume to be severely damaged by the fire, Thrawn may then decide that he is of little use, deciding to end Gideon, making him an example to others should they decide to disappoint or betray him. And so in this way, Gideon could still be alive and make a short return, but won't ever be a major threat or villain ever again. I think Gideon dying at the hands of someone like Thrawn could really emphasize the ruthlessness of the Imperial hierarchy and give him a somewhat more befitting end. That instead of the fire killing him, it would be the Empire that he had served all these years. I just think that would be some real comeuppance for the crimes that Gideon has committed. Not to mention, what a way that would be to reintroduce Thrawn as a major threat, allowing him the chance to establish himself to the audience as a force to be reckoned with and as a powerhouse within Imperial politics. I just think that would be such a cool way to bring Thrawn into the picture and remove Gideon from it. It would really be reminiscent of "there is always a bigger fish" moment. Also, if there was one person who would be able to figure out which Moff Gideon was the real one and which one was a clone, it would definitely be Thrawn. And I think Thrawn getting rid of Gideon would be the perfect opportunity to demonstrate how much smarter Thrawn is compared to Gideon. For much of the last 3 seasons of The Mandalorian, we've been told that and shown that Gideon is a pretty smart guy, someone who's able to scheme and trade secrets to carve his way to the top.
Secrets are my stock in trade. I hear whispers from one end of the galaxy to another.
But then here comes Thrawn and he absolutely decimates Gideon, demonstrating that Thrawn is far smarter and more cunning than the big bad of The Mandalorian. And so if the show were to bring Gideon back, then I would really bring him back for this moment. His death and demise would then add so much to the story and help set the stakes up for our heroes and the future confrontation with Thrawn. So let me know what you think in the comments down below about these theories. Anyways, that's all for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.